My name's Dave Wiedis, and I am the Executive Director of Serving Leaders Ministries. And we're here today to talk with Sarah Racine, who has had a lot of experience on the mission field working with trauma victims all over the world. She's here today because she is brave and is willing to share a pretty painful experience that she had on the mission field. So, Sarah, I want to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here and being willing to share some painful experiences that you've had.
Yep,
so give us sort of an overview of what took place for you, and this is maybe 5-6 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I was working as a long-term worker overseas in Asia Minor when my leader and I ended up having an affair that was emotional and sexual. It was over the span of 11 months, and the result of it ended up me coming home and repenting and just starting a long process of restoration and healing.
Well, thank you for being willing to be honest and to share your experience.
Yeah.
I think it would be beneficial, just take us back to the beginning. How did you meet this person?
Mm-hmm. And
how did you end up in an affair with him?
Mm-hmm. The first time that I met this individual, he was a speaker at a school, a training school that I was attending, and I became close friends with him and his wife. When I was doing long-term work in Bangladesh, both him and his wife ended up recruiting me for the Middle East. So in the beginning, it was leader, friendship, speaker. I knew them really well. They were close friends of mine, and that's how it all began.
So you were close friends with him as well as his wife?
Correct.
Okay. And so how did the grooming take place? How did the seduction take place?
Over the time, I would say it started out very in subtle ways. In the beginning, in that specific community, it was okay for singles to be out with, a married man or a married woman. No one really questioned it.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, it became more like it was just, friendship. We would go on road trips. Usually there was always another individual present, but it was never his wife. She was usually at home with the kids or she was away. It started out road trips, running errands, just very subtle.
When you say
trust.
road trip, do you mean overnight, or do you just mean?
During the day, we would
day.
take road trips exploring the area because I was staying with them in their house. So we would explore different places that I had not been to.
Okay. So from your perspective, you started out in a very innocent position.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, he started to move toward you to make overtures to you.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Again, it started very subtle. There was a situation that had him visiting close to my hometown. He was flying through, and so because I was looking at working with them long term, I had him meet some of my friends so they could give me perspective.
So this is before you actually decided to go over there?
Correct.
Okay.
And picked him up from the airport, went around with my friends, and ended up dropping him off at the airport so he could go home. And that's when he expressed feelings for me and that he loved me, and everything kind of shifted.
Wow.
From there.
So what was your response when he expressed his feelings for you? Because that caught you unawares, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that conversation, I actually thought he was going to ask me to not be a part of the organization. It definitely took me by surprise. I think in the beginning I was very angry, very confused, confused at how, I was engaging with him, how if I made advances, if I started this, if it was my issue.
You wondered, you started to blame yourself?
I started to blame myself,
okay.
Thinking that, I was the problem. And then it became into anger because I grew an attachment with this man. We bonded emotionally very quickly in the beginning because we have the same passions and desires, especially for long-term work. So then it became into frustrations that this individual is expressing interest in me, but he's off limits because he's married. So there were a lot of emotions that night, and I was also hours away from my home, so it was just a mess.
Okay. Sarah, let me take you back to the time when you dropped him off at the airport. Mm-hmm. And I want you to unpack that for us a little bit more, because you said you were surprised by his expression of love for you. Mm-hmm. So how did that unfold? What happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were sitting for coffee, and he expressed that he loved me, and that conversation probably went on for at least an hour of me just crying, questioning, asking why, what does he want to do with this, what was his intentions, me being angry with myself, with God. It was about an hour, and then he ended up missing his flight, so he couldn't get a next one until the morning. So then he asked if I would take him to a hotel nearby. At first I was a little bit reluctant, but then I felt bad, so I did. I took him to a hotel and dropped him off, and he asked that I would stay because he didn't want me to drive home, but I refused. So I made about the 3-4 hour drive back home that morning around 1-2 a.m.
Okay. And so then how did the relationship develop here before you actually decided to go overseas?
Mm-hmm. Again, it started subtle. I think that night on the way home, I had a lot of questions, and then I contacted two friends about what happened. One friend who knew him, and I just kind of said to myself, I'm not going to make this a bigger deal than it is. I was so focused on the mission and on the work overseas that I just kind of put this in the back of my mind. But then over the next few months, as all of us were preparing to move, he again would come towards my either home or cities that were nearby. It almost became like this dating situation, like we were in a relationship. It started out with emails. When he was away, he would email me often. And again, I felt this guilt that we all were selling everything and preparing to move overseas, and a lot of them were families with children, and felt this immense pressure that it was all on my shoulders. So how I said yes or no to this man, I was deciding the fate of so many individuals.
So what you're saying is there's a lot of people who are preparing to move over
Mm-hmm.
overseas,
Mm-hmm.
and all of these people are giving up so much
Mm-hmm.
to go over there for
Mm-hmm.
the sake of the mission that they're going to be doing there.
Yeah.
And you as well.
Yeah.
But he is courting you, he's dating you,
Yeah.
so to speak. And what did you tell yourself? Because you knew he was married.
Yeah.
You knew
Yeah.
he had kids.
Yeah.
What did you tell yourself?
I think in the beginning, I just told I put them out of the picture because they weren't in it. So for months, he would come and see me, or we would, again, email each other back and forth. Anytime that I would see him during those months, his wife wouldn't be there, his kids wouldn't be there. So it just kind of became this, them out of...
You compartmentalized.
Yeah, basically. And again, I made excuses of, if I bring this out, what's at stake? But at the same time,
Meaning, what's at stake? Meaning ministry's at stake.
Yes, yeah.
So if you were to be honest about this, ministry gets blown up, so
yeah.
to speak.
Yeah, and that's how it was in the beginning, but then over time, feelings grew for him. There was obviously dependency on one another, and there was that emotional bond that already had taken place. So he was easy to talk to. He was a friend. He was my leader, and I just trusted him.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what was the attraction for you?
Mm-hmm.
Because he was supposed to be a mentor
Mm-hmm.
and a leader of
Mm-hmm.
this whole ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming he's a very charismatic
Mm-hmm.
kind of guy. He's got a lot of giftings.
Yeah.
And is attractive in some ways.
Yeah.
What made you susceptible to that? And what was attractive about him?
Yeah, honestly, exactly what you just said was what attracted me to him. He did have a lot of giftings. He was very charismatic. He was very well-spoken, well-read, knew a lot about the Middle East, which, of course, is my heart. So he could talk the talk, which would definitely engage a lot of us and attract a lot of us to him. But especially for me, he knew how to engage my heart, which I think was the biggest thing that attracted me to him.
Engaging your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, with passions, desires, things that I wanted to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're talking about professionally or vocationally as opposed to emotionally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you decide to actually move overseas.
Mm-hmm.
You go there, and there's a community there that's set
Mm-hmm.
up and you're starting to engage in ministry there with him and other people. Talk about how that unfolded for you.
Yeah. So I think once I got overseas, everything kind of came to a halt. It was almost like a wake-up call. Because again, here, I didn't see his wife, I didn't see his kids, I compartmentalized. But over there, I was faced with it day after day. And even to the point where I would be babysitting for them so they can go out on dates. So once I arrived overseas, a lot of questioning started happening.
In your heart?
In my heart, in my mind.
And when you say questioning, what do you mean?
Well, here, when we were, stateside, I would ask, what is our future, or what is your intention? And his response would always be, you just never know. And so it left it wide enough and open enough for me to, okay, maybe he's thinking about, or what is he thinking about? Is he thinking about leaving her? And the way that he would speak about their relationship is they're just roommates. They're just friends. He kept it enough to still respect her with his words, but leave it open enough to basically say that I'm more in love with you. I don't love her as much anymore. Even when all of us would be together stateside, he would be messaging me on the side, or would always sit next to me and would touch me in some way. So I still kind of had that stateside of, I don't know if it was hope or wondering or kind of open end of what is this going to turn into. And then once I was in Asia Minor, then it really became this is so out of whack. This is not okay. What could happen? Nothing can happen out of this. And
you started to realize that there was not hope for this relationship.
There was no future.
There's no future. But it was over there that the relationship developed even more.
Yeah.
So you said initially you halted, things stopped because his wife was there, you saw the family.
Yeah.
And then the relationship picked up. And how did that go?
I think the relationship picked up mainly because of isolation. Mainly because he was my go-to person over there. I was, in an area that was full with couples who were engaged, who were married with children. I was really the only single one. And so I was already kind of on the fringe in that sense. And so he was my person. He was the one who got me, who understood me. And so I think because of the isolation, the relationship did start growing deeper, and it became more sexual than emotional, which is what kind of had me spiraling down, because I saw it becoming more of that rather than the emotional engagement.
So talk a little bit about this isolation. It makes you vulnerable. What was it like to be isolated and to be more vulnerable? And you made choices, right? You made choices not to turn to the other women there, or even to talk about what was going on.
Yeah.
Talk about that isolation first, and then talk about how that created that more vulnerability for you.
Yeah. With the isolation, so everyone who was there were followers of him. They all had been in ministry, in community with him. And so... Now
when you say followers of him, it almost makes it sound like a cult. Was it cultish?
I mean, the way that he... Yes, in ways. Definitely. In ways, I think the way that he leads, again, isolates, and when there are issues coming at hand, the way that he deals with it. He wants to keep it inside. He wants to keep it within community. He doesn't want others to know. So, yeah.
Okay, so
there's ways.
So there were cult-like traits of this leader, but it wasn't a cult itself.
No, it wasn't a cult itself.
It was a bona fide ministry there.
Yeah.
But it had those elements.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So because those individuals had been in his community before, and he has been, leading them, that kind of left me on the outskirts again. So that was part of the isolation of not even knowing who I could trust. If I were to communicate this, who could I trust, or who would believe me?
So I've got to ask you a hard question. You know Scripture.
Yeah.
You know what sin is.
Yeah.
You know it's sinful to have a relationship with a married man.
Yeah.
Right? So how did you rationalize your behavior? Because the behavior went on for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, as you said, it went from more emotional to more sexual.
Yeah.
What did you tell yourself? How did you lie to yourself?
Again, it's compartmentalizing. I think it was easier. That's why I say it was easier to do it over here stateside, when you're just kind of lying to your own heart and telling yourself lies that,
Right.
you know, this man is available or it's okay. Whereas overseas, that sin was continuing to hit me face to face every day. And like I said, that's when things really started spiraling down. But again, I had the pressure of a whole community and destroying a whole community who left everything to move there. So that on my conscience weighs you. So
so you're living a double life.
Yeah,
You're
basically.
You're in a Christian community.
Yeah.
He's preaching.
Yeah.
You're ministering to people.
I wasn't ministering to people, not
Okay.
at all. I was
Okay.
learning language, but
Okay.
other than that,
Okay.
I couldn't do anything other than that.
Okay.
So no, I wasn't, but I was technically.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're in training.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other people doing the gospel work.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like you're living a dual life.
Yeah.
And that's what I think you're saying when you say it really started to weigh on you.
Yeah.
Because you weren't telling yourself this isn't sin. You were telling
Yeah.
yourself I am sinning.
Yeah.
And it's wrong.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the pressure that you came under to keep quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And how did he do that?
So when we were engaging the way that we were overseas, there were a lot of pressures of we would have these meetups daily with him and I, but they became more sexual. So when I would question that, his response a lot of the times would be, I just need to be understanding.
That you needed to be understanding.
I need to be understanding. Multiple times that was told to me. I need to be more understanding.
Understanding of what?
Of his predicament.
Okay.
Of, yeah, his
The fact
situation.
that he's a leader, he's doing this ministry, he's engaging in the sinful behavior, but you need to be more understanding.
I need to be more understanding,
Okay.
yes. There was also the pressure with family units, because we both come from divorced families. There was that pressure of, if this gets out or this isn't contained between just the two of us, it could mean divorce for him and his wife, and then that would leave their children.
And was he making it as if that was your responsibility?
Yes,
That
it felt
was your-
very much that was my responsibility. I needed to understand and remain quiet. And yeah, so it felt very much, I mean, obviously I made the decision to be in this situation, but then it felt there was no way out of it. But there were pressures from community, pressures from, in my mind, pressures of the community and their well-being, pressures of family units, and that I would be the one who would destroy all of it.
Right. So you had to carry that pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that pressure manifest itself in you?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, we went there to do ministry, but I was not doing any work. I couldn't. The only thing that I was able to do was I did language learning, and then I would help produce some of the films. But other than that, I was unable to engage how I normally do when I'm overseas.
Because of emotional distress in you?
Because of everything. I mean, it was emotional distress, it was anxiety, it was just an inability to engage, to be honest. Every day we were required to be a part of the prayer room, so even worship and prayer, I was not really able to engage. We would have multiple meetings where it would be training sessions where the leader would preach, would teach, and almost every time I was just in the back, either crying or making chai so that I was off to the side and didn't have to experience, the community, because a lot of the times the teachings would happen minutes after we had just engaged in some way.
Wow. So really living a double life.
Yes, very much.
Just blatant.
Blatantly, yes.
And so you started to experience anxiety? And some depression as well?
Anxiety, depression. I've never been depressed in my life before. Never had anxiety issues, and even started getting major migraines multiple times a week, and never had an issue with that. So it was manifesting physically, emotionally, and I think when it was manifesting in that way, that's what really caught another couple's attention, who then became really my outlet.
What happened with that?
Yeah, so there was another couple that was there who came because of the work, not because they were following this leader, but they really came because of our work that we were doing there. I grew a relationship with them and really came to trust them, and started discussing with them that physically I'm not doing so well. I'm having these migraines, and so they were the ones who were really helping to push forward to see what that was, and then how could I come to understand, what they're about. So whether that's going back to America or finding a doctor or whichever, but they were the outlet to help get help.
This couple started to see the physical manifestations in you, and then they tried to help you. Did you tell them at the time that you were having an affair with a leader?
I didn't tell them at the time because, again, I was living with his mom, who she knew what was happening, and she even talked to her son about it. She talked to the leader about it.
She knew?
She had inklings. She thought something was going on.
She had an intuition that you were having an affair with her son.
I don't know if she had an intuition that we were having an affair or we were just getting too close.
Okay.
So she did talk to him one day, and he just kind of shut down her responses. But at the time I was living with her. And again, you have individuals who have been under him, who've known him longer than me.
Yeah.
And so I never saw a safe place or space to be able to communicate what I needed to, knowing that I would be safe, to be honest. It just didn't feel like there was an out for me there.
Okay, so how did the affair end?
After a few months with the migraines, I ended up talking to that couple and said I need to get home. There were a few instances where the leader was able to talk himself out of scenarios, just different things that I brought to his attention where I caught him in lies. But again, he was able to be manipulative and deceitful enough to talk his way out of it.
What kind of lies are you talking about?
Lies that he was not engaging with his wife in any other way other than them being just friends or housemates.
So if I can just sort of sum up what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
Is that the leader sort of represented that he and his wife were friends, they were roommates, they weren't having sexual relations.
Yes.
But he had your heart.
Yes.
He wanted you
Yes.
as his romantic partner.
Yes.
And so for some time you believed that.
Yes.
And then you discovered that that wasn't true.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there were a couple instances where I found very clearly that was not true. And then finally she became pregnant, and that was kind of an out for me. It was an ability to say, you are blatantly lying.
You had evidence.
I had evidence.
Right.
So I discussed with this couple about wanting to go home and to see what was happening more so with emotional, physical, just, with the migraines. And I made it out as if I would just be home for a period of time, which made my leader my leave. And as soon as I touched ground in the States, I told my family and then my leaders here.
You came back to the church and confessed what had happened. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about that process of repentance in a moment. But how did the leader respond to that?
Yes, when I touched down in the States, it felt like fog was lifted. And that leader was messaging me the whole time on my flight. And I think it's, I think he I think he knew something was going to happen, or he was trying to protect and guard. And I started pushing back, and his response, and me saying, this is over, this needs to be done, this needs to be in the light, this is not okay. His response to that was always, again, that I needed to understand that his life was at stake, his children's lives were at stake. He even, at that time, it was nighttime for them, so he said that him and his son were praying for me, and I loved his son, so he used a lot of manipulation, a lot of abuse and leadership to keep me quiet. But I started pushing back more and started trying to FaceTime his wife. And then he started to intercept those phone calls.
What you were going to FaceTime his wife for?
I was going
purpose?
to tell her what was happening because I was just done. But he kept intercepting, and then I couldn't get a hold of her and couldn't get a hold of him. And then about 2-3 hours later, I heard from that couple that I trusted. I heard from them, and they had said, the leader just told us what had happened. And then again, it just felt like a huge weight lifted.
Right. So you come home, the fog starts to lift. And talk about the process of repentance. What did you do? How did you start to think clearly? How did your relationship with the church take place?
Yeah, so I was actually with my family on vacation at the time when everything happened. So I first told them. And then that next week was full of conversations with me and then that couple in Asia Minor to compare stories and to see what was the truth. As soon as I got back here to Pennsylvania, I met with the mission director, and then I met with my leaders and told them everything that had transpired. So that was a process. It was a couple of meetings. It was a lot of conversations here, and then with the leadership that ended up taking place over in Asia Minor. Again, comparing stories and making sure truth was being told.
In other words, making sure that he was not telling stories.
Yes, correct.
And was he trying to paint you out in a certain way?
At the beginning, no, because he was unable to there. They knew me. They knew what was happening with me, so he wasn't able to. I think he was caught himself enough in a bind that he wasn't able to tell lies. So there with that community, he was not able to. Okay. But
at some point later
he has been discussing with multiple people, either recruiting or other ministries that he's been a part of, that I was a seductress and that I'm still trying to make advances towards him.
He actually said that?
He actually said that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk about your process of repentance. You come home. I know that you went in front of the church.
Yeah.
And you went to the elders of the church, right?
Yeah, I went to all of the elders in the church because the church did send me out. And there they had a plan of attack, and so did the couple over in Asia Minor. They had a plan of attack of what these next few years could look like in restoration and healing. So there was a decision that was made with both parties, which I'm very thankful that I had. But one of the leaders mentioned about getting in front of the church, which I think at first I was a bit nervous about, but then I saw the end result of being more freedom anyways.
Right.
So I ended up getting in front of church and expressing that I had sinned and I will now be home for a time of restoration and healing.
Right. And you entered into a counseling relationship. Talk about that. That was with me and maybe a few others, but talk about what the counseling process was like for you and a little bit about that work.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, to be honest, it was a little uncomfortable because I had known of you, but I didn't know you super well. Sure. But I knew you had a lot of wisdom, and again, the leaders, I think they have a lot of wisdom in who they would send me to, and so in the beginning it was definitely uncomfortable, but it was also an opportunity to discover, we talked a lot about the iceberg, but to discover like what are roots, and I think it gave me a lot of clarity even of fruit, because I think worldly fruit and godly fruit are very different.
Well, let's slow down, because you
okay.
mentioned iceberg.
Yes.
So we started to talk about what is going on in your heart.
Yes.
That created the behavior.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
So talk about that a little bit. Remember we talked
about
longings.
Like,
so we
yeah.
We
Okay. You want me to go on more?
Yeah. What you were longing for something.
Oh yeah.
Because
yeah.
if you remember, we said
Yes.
all behavior makes sense when you
Yes.
understand context.
Yeah.
Not saying all behavior is right
Yeah.
or justified,
Yeah.
just that it makes sense.
Yeah.
So for you engaged in what you knew to be sinful behavior, and in some ways it was really confusing to you.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're saying, why did I do this?
Yeah.
Which is a big question that most people ask when they do things that they don't really want to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what you discovered in terms of your own longings?
Yeah. So I think sometimes it's why did I do what I did? But I also made decisions to blatantly sin. But knowing that underlying like longing is a longing to be known and a longing to be seen, and especially with a man who is wanting and desiring to do what I want to do, because I want to engage hard areas. In ministry, your average person isn't really wanting to go to the Middle East, and so to have someone who engaged in that,
right.
I didn't realize how deep of a longing that was. Right. I thought, being single and doing this, I'm fine and I'm okay, but I didn't realize that was deeper.
It's, in a sense, the longing for it to be known and to be seen is a landmine.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're not in touch with that, right, and someone comes along and starts to satisfy that longing, that what can start out as a legitimate longing right, becomes illegitimate behavior, sinful behavior in order to satisfy that legitimate longing.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So you were able to start to understand your own heart.
Yeah.
One of the things that I remember you talking about was discovering your own voice again.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think after everything that happened, and again, because it was a leader and it was abusive leadership, because I wanted to do right, and I think that that's just, my personality. But I saw, with even, people pleasing, I would remain quiet. My personality started to change when I came back. I wasn't as bold or as spoken out. I just kind of kept to myself or remained a little bit more quiet, and in a way lost my voice because...
Do you mean when you were over there?
No, when I actually came back.
Okay.
I think because of the way things transpired and the way things ended, and seeing this leader was still in ministry, it just felt like, again, I was the one who was not Christian enough, or I had the bigger sin, and so I think my voice actually ended up getting a bit smothered in some ways. I just didn't want to make any waves because I had done something so horrible and big.
Sarah, what happened to that ministry after you did come home? He had threatened it's going to blow up and everything, and probably it should, right? But what actually did happen to all those families and the ministry?
Yeah, it actually did blow up in some ways. I think with any ministry, again, you have followers or ones who are so close to the leader that any news, it doesn't change their mind. They're loyal, and so they won't move from that position. But what happened was there were two other couples who were really safe, healthy. They came from local churches here in the States, and they kind of came into place of leadership, and they encouraged this leader and his family to leave, and they were still staying the course of the vision
of that ministry there.
Of that ministry, but they didn't want it to be a part of that organization, so they were encouraging encouraging the leader to take down the organization, basically, and gave families an opportunity to stay or to go home. The end result really was everyone came back to the States, and that, I think, caused a lot of fear in me, only because, again, I thought I ruined everything.
You're responsible.
And yes, and especially with this area that we were in, I was just nervous more so of like the locals and that we had just messed up this opportunity for God to be made known in that area. But the end result ended up being this couple that I confided in. They're now doing the work. They're not with the organization. They're with a local church. They're doing amazing things there. And you see a church plant that happened that we initially went to do, but it just was not working. And so now there is a church plant. But each of those couples have disengaged with this leader and that ministry, and have come back to the States or back to Canada and have really dove into local bodies, which has been really encouraging to hear and see.
So there's a redemptive aspect of all of this.
Yes, yeah. And I was able to go back there to get the rest of my things and have a time of restoration and healing and asking for forgiveness with all of them.
With the community.
With the community, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I also think we talked about this idea that a leader is responsible, but that you're not excused because a leader seduced you or groomed you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you were willing to face those truths in a very,
Yeah.
very courageous way, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, too, with my family and with my parents being divorced, and then when it comes to male leaders and in ministry, and there were so many layering aspects with all of this that, because like you said, an affair doesn't happen overnight, but there were so many variables that set us up for this. Boundaries were crossed in the very beginning, and things that should have been protected weren't.
Yeah, and the ability that we all have to lie to ourselves, right? We know the truth at the same time we don't know the truth, or at the same time we can lie to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that was another area that we tried to really take apart and understand.
Yeah.
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 So you've been extraordinarily brave in doing this interview. In fact, I mentioned it to a friend that I was going to be doing an interview with you, and he said, "Why in the world would someone be willing to expose themselves like this?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this interview?"
Yeah, I think when I came back after this experience, I started hearing more of this happening, especially in ministry and with leaders. And I was always curious more on the woman's side of things, because I hear what happens to the leaders or what doesn't happen to the leaders, but I never really get to hear the woman's perspective. And I think for us, whether it's Christian community or it's even secular community, I think a lot of the times the blame can get put very easily on the woman. She was a seductress. What was she wearing? What was she doing? How was she acting? And the blame is put on her. So my intention in this interview is to give more of a perspective of, even for long-term workers, how we need to be caring, sending people out, things that we need to be aware of and be cautious. And because I was in my mid-20s, at the time, and there were so many things that my leaders, and not putting it on them, I made a decision.
Sure.
But there were so many things that people could have seen as red flags and could have protected and guarded.
Right. And that's actually my next question. There's pastors who are going to watch this who are sending teams overseas or on the mission field. What would you tell them about some of the red flags and how to shepherd well the people who are being sent?
Yeah, I think accountability is one of the major things that I should have been more aware of, and I wish my leaders would have been more aware of.
How could they have been more aware of that, and what could they have done?
I think just lack of accountability, just asking if, a crazy situation happens, if this happens, what is the plan of attack? If there is something that happens even with the leader in position, because again, we're all sinful in nature, but what would happen? And unfortunately, this leader, and I should have seen it, but he just had no one above him. He was leading everything. He was, the go-to, and he had the final say. And even, now is still currently in ministry without accountability. And so he's able to continue on the way that he desires,
Right.
with no one to really take responsibility. So
Right.
even if we want to ask things, of him, there's no one above him to go to.
There's no organizational structure to help him
No.
be held accountable.
Yeah, he would
Yeah.
say that he has structure now, but it's constantly being changed depending if that person goes along with him or not,
Right,
or goes
right.
against. But so yeah, lack of accountability I think is huge.
But what about for you? For example, you're the person being sent.
Yeah.
What advice would you give for your pastor, for example, or the sending church?
Yeah.
How could they shepherd your hearts well?
Yeah. I think just doing even more investigation, doing more work in investigating who this leader is, what are their credentials, what are their training, why are you able
Due
to
diligence.
lead? Yes.
Do the due diligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, look at the structure. How did this organization come to be? Who's the oversight? What's the vision?
Right.
And then ask those hard questions of how do you care not only for marriages within, but for the singles.
How do you safeguard singles?
How do you safeguard? That was the thing, is boundaries were crossed. Even the simplicity of he was taking me alone to run errands when it should have been his wife. It should have been, two other people. All of those things are there to put in guard and to protect not only me, but him as well.
Sure. And do you think it would have been helpful if someone had been tuned into you a little bit more, either from the States or there, to say, Sarah, how's your heart doing? Like, what are you doing with your own purity?
Yeah.
What are you doing with your own longings? Do you think that would have made a difference for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing over there, again, living with the double life, I didn't have anyone from my community here who have known me for 10 plus years.
Right.
It was all new people who were just getting to know me. So I think if any of my friends here or community or leadership would have seen me, they automatically would have said something's going on and address it.
Right.
I did have a friend who visited over there, and she was amazing, but she asked some of those hard questions, and I confided in her, and that's when kind of the game plan started coming of how do I get out of this.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's very helpful to have continued engagement, but obviously being able to physically see that person tells a lot more than on a phone.
One other question about this, unfortunately, we both know that these kind of things go on. Sexual immorality in ministry goes on all the time.
Yes.
If you were going to talk to a person who's on the field or a pastor who is now engaging in sexual misconduct or having an affair, what would you tell them?
I would say, first, it takes two. And that just because you're the leader doesn't mean that you are above reproach. So I would encourage that both parties would come right away off the field and get plugged in to a local body. I think especially when it comes to overseas work like this, you're being supported. So that's other people's finances that are going, that's paying for your job basically. So I think coming off, being able to get a job and just do the hard, long work that your marriage needs is not only going to benefit you,
and also to do that internal work that they need to do.
Yes,
right.
It will benefit you, it will benefit your marriage, it will benefit your future ministry. And again, everyone is sinful in nature, but when you see someone who has repented from this, I can see stories of restoration and healing, and even of those individuals going back onto the field. But I think if you're not dealing with those inner issues, then it just happens again.
Right.
And it does.
So you're saying there's hope for someone if they're willing to be brave enough to face this inner issues that they're having and to repent.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What did it cost you? We're out here 5-6 years later. What did this experience cost you?
I want to say everything.
Well, you say that, you're smiling, but I mean, that's a hard question.
I know.
Yeah. And you said everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's been a very, very difficult past couple of years, and it's still difficult. I think there's a lot of restoration and healing and forgiveness that has been done.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, in the beginning, it was no easy walk. Again, you're at least for me, I was always wondering who knows, because my name wasn't supposed to be mentioned, but who knows, who sees me differently because they know. Even within the church, it was hard to engage I have tons of friends who are married, but to engage their husbands for a while, I was like, just don't engage them. So it was definitely hard on so many levels in the beginning of wondering what people really think about you, because
and whether they trust you.
And you just, you have this mark on you. And especially in the beginning, I got some hateful emails that were not so kind. But now I'm slowly seeing that the truth is continuing to be revealed, and it always will be. It just may not look the way that I think. So even when it comes to justice being served, that's something that I've had to let go over the past couple of years of how I think it should look might not look that way, but still staying the course and I guess focusing on myself rather than the leader. But there's times where it's really difficult, especially when you still see them in ministry. That's very, very hard to witness.
Well, you have been extraordinarily brave.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate your courage. And I hope that many, many people will learn some lessons from the wisdom that you've gained from your experience.
Thanks.
You're welcome.